You should use light or heavy weight to build muscles faster. Everyone seems to have their own opinion on this topic. Some believe that high repetitions and bodyweight calisthenics exercises are the best, while others swear by heavy weight training for faster muscle growth. So today, I want to analyze which training style will lead to the best results for you personally, based on scientific data, rather than just giving you another opinion. To really uncover the answer, we first have to be clear on what training intensity is in exercise. Training intensity in science refers to the percentage of your 1 rep maximum that you can train with. If you were using 100% of your 1 rep max, that would mean you're using a weight load so heavy that you can complete only 1 repetition and nothing more. On the other hand, 80% of your 1 rep max, 1 RM, would be a weight load that you could probably repeat 7 to 8 times before reaching failure. Each level of training intensity, whether 70, 80, or 90%, correlates with a certain repetition count based on data collected from many strength training studies. You can see all these data simplified in the table in front of you now. As you can see, it's quite obvious that if you train with less weight or a lower percentage of your 1 rep max, you'll be able to do more repetitions. But if you train with heavier weights or a higher percentage of your 1 RM, you'll only manage fewer repetitions. Simple, right? So, let's see why some lifters claim that you should train with light weights if you want to maximize muscle growth, and why they recommend performing anywhere from 15 to 25 repetitions per set. Well, first, the high repetition crowd claims that light weights and high repetitions are better because they create a lot of metabolic stress, which is a physiological process that occurs during resistance training in response to low energy levels within the cell. This leads to metabolic buildup, such as inorganic phosphate and lactate ions. High repetition training often feels more effective, meaning you get a huge pump and can see your muscles bulging when you look in the gym mirror. So, it must be the ideal training style, right? Well, not necessarily. There's nothing magical about doing light, high repetition pump. Training isn't a bad strategy for muscle growth either, and many popular bodybuilders rely mainly on light lifting. But there's nothing magical about it. For example, several studies have found that you can build the same amount of muscle with low, moderate, and high repetitions. Digging deeper into the research, data show that very high repetitions in sets, where you use only 30% of your 1 RM, can stimulate as much muscle growth as a traditional range of bodybuilding repetitions, where you use 80% of your 1 RM. But please, before assuming you can use any weight load or any repetition range to build muscle, hear me out, because it's not as simple in real life as these studies done in a controlled laboratory context. There are 3 important things to keep in mind. First, very low repetition training, such as doing 1 or 2 repetitions per set, is very unlikely to be ideal for muscle growth. We can see this in a study that found that doing 8 heavy sets of 1 rep max led to worse results than 8 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions. So, make sure to select a weight load that allows you to squeeze out at least 3 repetitions per set if you want to maximize muscle growth. Second, muscle growth training with heavy loads for low repetitions is much more stressful for your joints and connective tissues compared to training with a moderate or high repetition range. Even if you look at studies that found that people who trained with low repetitions gained the same amount of muscles, you usually also see that they had a higher rate of injuries. Very low repetitions may not be ideal if you have joint pains or aches, or if there's any other reason that makes you more susceptible to injuries. Also, if you like training with very heavy weights, too much weight for a low amount of repetitions, I wouldn't recommend doing this for isolation exercises, such as bicep curls or lateral raises, because it's simply too difficult to maintain proper form when doing these isolation movements with heavy weights. And you're much more likely to cheat and use momentum. Compound exercises like squats, bench press, and deadlift, on the other hand, can be performed with heavier loads and for lower repetitions without issues, as long as you maintain proper form and aim for at least 3 repetitions. Now let's take a look at the other end of the spectrum in high repetitions. Immediately, we encounter our third problem with selecting any random repetition range to build the same amount of muscles with high repetition sets as you would with moderate ones. Sets of repetitions for which you'd have to train to failure indicate that if you don't train to failure with the higher repetition sets, you won't reap the maximum benefits, as most people don't have the endurance to go 5 sets to failure with a very light weight of, say, 30% of your 1 rep max. It tends to be better to do more sets in moderate and low repetition ranges. I mean, think about it. If you're using about 30% of your 1 rep max, you'll be able to repeat anywhere between approximately 25 to 35 repetitions. You'll have the endurance to do this for 5 sets as well. You'll be able to keep your mind focused for 25 to 35 repetitions without giving in or resorting to awful form before actually failing. Imagine, right? Now, even if you've done 50% of your 1 rep max for an exercise like squats and try to do as many repetitions as possible, you'd likely be completely exhausted after just one all-out set. That being said, don't completely avoid training with high repetitions or any repetition range for that matter. You can use higher repetition sets for isolation exercises like lateral raises or bicep curls, where excessive fatigue isn't as much of a problem. And research actually shows that you'll grow more muscle when you train with a variety of repetition ranges, rather than always trying to hit the same number of repetitions in each set. The reason for this is that different repetition ranges emphasize different muscles, building pathways in the body. High repetition training, for example, mainly triggers the metabolic stress pathway, which, as I mentioned before, is a process that causes very low energy levels within the cell and leads to the accumulation of lactate, phosphate, and hydrogen ions. All of these have their benefits for muscle growth. In addition to high repetition training, it's also better for training your slow twitch muscle fibers, which are fibers that aren't as strong as fast twitch ones but are more resistant to fatigue. Heavy weight training with low repetitions, on the other hand, creates large amounts of mechanical tension and stimulates muscle growth in a different way, activating specialized proteins and muscle cells known as mechanosensitive cells, which, in turn, triggers a cascade of genetic and hormonal signals that stimulate your body to build new muscles. These mechanosensitive cells are only activated by very high levels of tension. That's why it's beneficial to also include heavy weight training and low repetitions in your exercise routine. Again, typically, more than 3 repetitions is better for low repetition sets, for injury prevention and faster progress in muscle building. In addition to providing greater mechanical tension, low repetitions and heavy weights are also more effective for training the fast twitch contraction of muscle fibers, which are muscle fibers that can generate a lot of force but also fatigue very quickly. Another major benefit of heavyweight training is that, even though it's heavyweight, lower repetition sets are great for building muscle. They're also one of the best ways to get physically stronger. And even if you don't care about gaining strength and just want to become as big as possible, strength gains are still beneficial for size gains. Research shows that strength development is accompanied by increased muscle activation levels during exercise. Developing more strength from heavy weightlifting ultimately benefits muscle growth, even if you train with moderate or higher repetitions, because the strength gains you get from your lower repetition sets will transfer to your moderate and higher repetition sets, allowing you to lift a heavier load for those sets too, leading to more overall muscle growth. So, to summarize, it's best to include low repetitions, moderate repetitions, and high repetition sets because they all activate different growth pathways in the body. Now, from a practical standpoint, you probably want to do most sets in a moderate repetition range. It's less taxing than doing many sets of high repetitions and is less taxing on your joints and connective tissues than focusing on lifting very heavy weights for a small number of repetitions. So, let me provide some examples of how you can incorporate all these different repetition ranges into your workouts for the best results. Personally, my favorite way is through periodization. Using periodization, you can change your repetition ranges every workout, every week, or every month. Personally, I've seen better results by switching every month because it gives me enough time to adapt and get stronger for the specific repetition range I'm working on. So, one of the simplest ways to do this is to spend about 3 to 4 weeks within one of 3 repetition ranges before moving on to the next. The 3 repetition ranges that have worked best for me are 3 to 5 repetitions, 6 to 8 repetitions, and 12 or more repetitions. So, you spend 3 to 4 weeks lifting a heavy enough load that makes you fail at 3 to 5 repetitions. Then, for the next 3 to 4 weeks, you switch to the 6 to 8 repetition range, where you select a lighter weight than what you were using for 3 to 5 repetitions, but it should still be heavy enough to fail in your new range of 6 to 8 repetitions. And after 3 to 4 weeks, do the same for the 12 or more repetition range and just go back and forth. This should help you get stronger and build more muscle faster. Every time you go back to a previous repetition range, which you may have done weeks or months ago, try to increase the weight you do for that repetition range compared to last time. Now, if you don't want to stick to one repetition range for up to a month at a time, You can also incorporate different repetition ranges during each workout and set those repetition ranges depending on your goals. Let's say if you're focused on gaining more strength as you gain muscle, you might only try to do 15% of your sets in the 3 to 5 repetition range, 70% of your sets in the 6 to 12 repetition range, and 15% of your sets in the 13 or more repetitions range. And that's just to give you an idea. You don't need to do calculations to figure this out or be exact with this setup. You would just incorporate 1 to 2 heavy sets and 1 to 2 light sets for every 7 moderate repetition sets you do. Understand that there's nothing particularly magical about this setup. It's just a way to incorporate all the repetition ranges for maximum muscle stimulation. Another scenario where you're also focused on gaining strength, in addition to building muscle, would be to act about 30% of your sets in the 3 to 5 repetition range, 60% of your sets in the 6 to 12 repetition range, and only 10% of your sets in the 13 or more repetition range. One last scenario is if you're older, more injury-prone, recovering from a previous injury event, or if you have joint pains. Then, you could focus more on working with a high number of reps. Older individuals can especially benefit from high repetition sets because they have less connective tissue due to a lower protein turnover rate, which increases the risk of injuries when training heavy and weakens joints and tendons. So, older adults and people with joint issues or injuries can do 0% of their sets in the 3 to 5 repetition range, 60% of their sets in the 6 to 12 repetition range, and 40% of their sets in 13 or more repetitions to wrap it all up. Personally, even today, I prefer heavyweight over lightweight, but I incorporate all repetition ranges, from low to high, in my workout routines because of the obvious benefits. If you enjoyed this video and found these tips on workout variety helpful, I would be very grateful if you could subscribe to my YouTube channel. Your subscription means a lot to me and helps me continue to share relevant and informative content. Together, we can build a community dedicated to physical development and well-being. Thank you very much for your support and for being here. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of my future videos. I look forward to having you as part of this journey of growth and knowledge. Until next time.